Hello, and welcome back to the Southern Bible Thumper channel. For this video, we will be reading Exodus chapter 17. And all the congregation of the children of Israel journeyed from the wilderness of Sin after their journeys, according to the commandment of the Lord, and pitched in Rephidim, and there was no water for the people to drink. Wherefore the people did chide with Moses, and said, Give us water, that we may drink. And Moses said unto them, Why chide ye with me? Wherefore do ye tempt the Lord? And the people thirsted there for water. And the people murmured against Moses, and said, Wherefore is this that thou hast brought us up out of Egypt, to kill us, and our children, and our cattle, with thirst? And Moses cried unto the Lord, saying, What shall I do unto this people? They be almost ready to stone me. And the Lord said unto Moses, Go on before the people, and take with thee of the elders of Israel, and thy rod, wherewith thou smotest the river. Take in thine hand, and go. Behold, I will stand before thee there upon the rock in Horeb, and thou shalt smite the rock, and there shall come water out of it, that the people may drink. And Moses did so in the sight of the elders of Israel. And he called the name of the place Massah and Meribah, because of the chiding of the children of Israel, and because they tempted the Lord, saying, Is the Lord among us, or not? Then came Amalek, and fought with Israel in Rephidim. And Moses said unto Joshua, Choose us out men, and go out, fight with Amalek. Tomorrow I will stand on the top of the hill with the rod of God in mine hand. So Joshua did as Moses had said to him, and fought with Amalek. And Moses, Aaron, and Hur went up to the top of the hill. And it came to pass, when Moses held up his hand, that Israel prevailed, and when he let down his hand, Amalek prevailed. But Moses' hands were heavy, and they took a stone, and put it under him, and he sat thereon. And Aaron and Hur stayed up his hands, the one on the one side, and the other on the other side, and his hands were steady until the going down of the sun. And Joshua discomfited Amalek and his people with the edge of the sword. And the Lord said unto Moses, Write this for a memorial in a book, and rehearse it in the ears of Joshua, for I will utterly put out the remembrance of Amalek from under heaven. And Moses built an altar, and called the name of it Jehovah Nissi. For he said, Because the Lord hath sworn that the Lord will have war with Amalek from generation to generation. Summarizing Exodus chapter 17, the people of Israel traveled to a place called Rephidim. There was no water, and they began to complain, demanding that Moses give them water. Again, they were comparing their current predicament in the wilderness to a romanticized memory of their slavery in Egypt. They asked Moses again, mockingly, if he brought them out of Egypt to kill them with thirst. Moses cries out to God for a solution. God tells him to strike a rock in front of the Israelites, and that water will come out of it. Moses follows directions, and there's water for the Israelites. In verse 8, the Israelites were attacked by Amalek, and in the New International Version, it's Amalekites. And that's another reason why I like to have different versions on hand. I use BibleRef.com because the way it was written, it's written in the singular, so it isn't all the way clear who was attacking until you look at a different version. Moses tells Joshua to choose warriors to fight them, and he will hold his arms over them while holding the staff of God. As long as Moses held his arms up with the staff, the Israelites advanced on the enemy. Aaron and another Israelite named Hur held his arms when Moses got tired. Joshua and the Israelites won in verse 13. In verse 14, God tells Moses to document this incident in a book and recite it to Joshua, that God will wipe out the memory of Amalek from under heaven. Moses built an altar and called it Yahweh Nissi in the New Living Translation. But in the King James Version, it says, The Lord is my banner, but it means, or another term in a different version says Yahweh Nissi. Some of the highlights for chapter 17. The Israelites grumbled or complained when their needs weren't getting met when they wanted them to be met. God has already provided multiple solutions and unexplainable miracles. In verse 2, the Israelites demanded answers from Moses instead of asking God directly, placing all the responsibility on him. In addition, the Israelites kept romanticizing their enslavement in Egypt because, with their freedom, they had to deal with the unknown. Slavery provided routine answers and provision, but removed their civil and human rights. Without promised provision, freedom became meaningless. An abused and hated slave with promised provision was more ideal than a free man, guided by God, dealing only with the uncertainty of provision. But even that might have been different if the children of Israel individually sought God to answer them the way Rachel did in Genesis chapter 25, verse 22. Rachel asked God why her pregnancy was so difficult, and God answered her. Rachel, in this chapter, Genesis chapter 25, verse 22, is so significant because she's the first person who went to God without God having to speak to her first. Because if we look at her husband, Genesis chapter 26, verse 24, God appeared to Isaac and gave him a message. If we look at Exodus chapter 3, verse 4, God spoke to Moses through a burning bush. In Genesis chapter 31, verse 3, God spoke to Jacob first. In Genesis chapter 12, verse 1, God spoke to Abraham first. Genesis chapter 6, verse 13, God spoke to Noah. And then in Genesis chapter 2, verse 16, God spoke to Abraham. So the pattern is that God speaks to someone first, or at least the recorded patterns in the Bible, is that God speaks to someone first, and that's how the person knows that there is a uh, personal relationship with God. But Rachel, it didn't record her, or the Bible doesn't say that God spoke to her first. She just said, I have a problem. I need answers. I'm going to God. And God answered her. So clearly, in Genesis chapter 25, verse 22, God was open to having that type of personal relationship. And in all these instances, he was. But Rachel was the first to be noted as going to God and asking for a solution. The next highlight is verse 14. God tells Moses to document this triumph over the people of Amalek in a book. And then Moses built an altar to God, but that was out of his own will. All God told him to do was to document. So that is Exodus chapter 17, and the next upload will be Exodus chapter 18.